The book of Exodus. We are going to continue on this morning. We'll back up just a little bit, and I think most of you was here last week, but just to kind of give a little synopsis, Cody and I decided kind of not to do a recap and just to take on off, so we'll get some handouts back going next week, but just to recap just a little bit and to move us forward this morning before we turn into the book of Exodus. If you remember, we spent, and we talked about this even last week, but we spent some time in the life of Joseph, and again, not to repeat the whole story, but we found ourselves how Joseph ended up in Egypt, that he ended up there in Potiphar's house, and then we know that he came out of the prison to interpret Pharaoh's dream. And again, Pharaoh put him in charge. The only one that was greater than Joseph was Pharaoh. So we found ourselves in Egypt. And then if you remember, Israel and Jacob, his family came down to Egypt as well. And we left off the story there last week. If you turn to Exodus, if you look back there in Genesis chapter 50, so the final chapter, in verse 22, it says, "And Joseph dwelt in Egypt, he and his father's house, and Joseph lived 110 years. And down verse 24, "And Joseph said unto his brethren, I die, and God will surely visit you, and bring you out of this land, into the land which he sware to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And Joseph took an oath of the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and ye shall carry up my bones from hence. So Joseph died, being 110 years old, and they embalmed him and put him in a coffin in Egypt." So, if you will, a period of time kind of takes place here, and we close, you know how I like to do this, we close the curtains, we close the chapter, and we open it back up. So this morning, as we look here in Exodus chapter 1 and verse 6, we open the curtains back up, and the Bible's describing some things to us. It says, "And Joseph died, and all his brethren, and all that generation. And the children of Israel were fruitful, and increased abundantly, and multiplied, and waxed exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. Now there arose up a new king over Egypt," so a new Pharaoh's come up, "which knew not Joseph." You know, I think just there, we're going to keep reading here in a minute, but I think there's so many times in the Bible that mentions about the next generation who didn't know God. In this case, it's not who didn't know God, but it's who did not know Joseph. And, you know, I think that's important, and I think it's one thing, I mean, it's really important and the most important that we raise up a generation that knows God. And, there's some churches, now we don't have that here, thank goodness, hallelujah for that, because we put an emphasis on children. A lot of people come to Chilhowee Baptist Church because of our children's programs. And that's how we pass it on. It's why do we have nursery? Why do we have Wednesday night kids program? Why do we have children's church on Sunday? You know, why would we spend all that money in church camps and going to those different things and vacation Bible school? It's because we're investing in that next generation. And that's how you do it, or that's how we've figured out to do it with the local church. And it's so important. And it was neat just this past Wednesday night, I love teaching those kids just different stories out of the Bible. And it's amazing that, about the stories in the Bible, and it's exciting. And I think we should share it with our children. So here there rose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And that just, I mentioned it, I think, last week. It fascinates me because, just the life of Joseph, if you just took the story of Joseph. Now, all the way through, we see God and God paving the way and God doing all the work. But just the life of Joseph is one of those stories in the Bible that is exciting. It's exciting about what took place. This man was number 2 to Pharaoh. He sold corn to those when the famine hit the land. I mean, people from everywhere came to buy corn in Egypt because they were the only ones that had it. He had so much in store that he couldn't even be numbered. So, I mean, that's a pretty interesting story. But there's a Pharaoh here that's rose up, this new king, that didn't even know Joseph. And it says, and he said unto the people, behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. And you know what's, again, I mean, maybe it's just the way my brain works, but you know, you would think, and which we know that God's working in the background, and we know that God's got this plan, and that nothing, you know, I think that's the other point this morning. I've got to be careful, I don't want to get sidetracked, but I think there's a couple different things you can see here. There's a generation that rose up that didn't know about Joseph, didn't know about God interpreting the dreams. There's something else going on behind the scenes that it proves that God is in control of kings. He's in control of pharaohs. He's in control of presidents. He holds it all in the palm of his hand, because what we learned this morning and what we're going to see is God working in the background, that all of a sudden his plan to get the Israelites out of Egypt, because Joseph even ended with that. He said, surely God's going to visit you and he's going to bring you up out of this land. And immediately in Exodus, we see God behind the scenes working his plan, because he holds all this in the palm of his hand. So there was a Pharaoh that didn't know nothing about Joseph, and instead of looking at the Israelites like, hey, this crowd, you know, we might ought to get to know them. I've heard about Joseph. Well, he hadn't heard about Joseph. But he could say, you know, won't we turn these into friends instead of foes? And instead, he went a different direction. He didn't look at them as friends and think, golly, look what Joseph has done for us, and look what, you know, how God was with him. And boy, he took care of the last Pharaoh, that they didn't starve to death during the famine. Instead, all he saw was the problems that could come along with these people that had multiplied and increased abundantly. And that was, as we know here, we're going to read, is that, hey, if an enemy comes against us and they side with them, we're in trouble. We're in trouble, because there's so many, they're going to overtake us. So let's read that. It says in verse 9, and he said unto his people, behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Man, there's too many of them. Come on, let us deal wisely with them. And it's funny, you know, I don't know that was too wise, was it? But in his eyes, it was a smart thing to do. He said, come, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens. Verse 12, but the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were grieved because of the children of Israel. And the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor. Remember, we looked at that word a little bit last week, talked about hardness. It says, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar and in brick, and in all manner of service in the field. All their service wherein they made them serve was with rigor, with hardness. So any hard job you could find in the land of Egypt, the Israelites were doing it. I mean, anything. I mean, hard bondage. Matter of fact, here later on in our story this morning, we're going to see, I think if we get that far, we'll see Moses was offended when he saw one of the Egyptians beating the Israelite, beating the Hebrew. And remember, so he got so mad. So, I mean, that shows you even, again, that rigor. Like, it wasn't just, listen, you were going to go out here for a little bit of pay, but I mean, they stood over them. And if you tried to take a break or needed a drink of water, I mean, I think they were whipping them. They were telling them, no, get back to work. So again, this rigor and this hard, so that was his plan, Pharaoh. Again, I truly like when the Bible uses these words. It says that Pharaoh decided this was a wise thing to do, that this was going to be wise. And the wise thing to do, we know, would have been to embrace them. Of course, that wasn't God's plan. And again, we see God working in the background. So his first plan is to afflict them, to make them have hard labor, rigor. So then we kind of fast forward here to another plan. So that wasn't really working, because the more that they did this, the more that they multiplied, the more that they increased. So now they've come up with a new plan. So let's look over in chapter number 2 this morning. We'll skip ahead just a little bit here. So now plan B, when that wasn't turning out very good, it was that they would kill the children, that they'd pitch them into the Nile and that they would kill them. And if you had a son, they would kill him, throw him into the Nile. So now we fast forward to chapter number 2, and it says, and there went out a man of the house of Levi and took a wife of the daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived and bare a son. So, we kind of have the overview picture, and now we've closed the curtains, we've reopened the scene, if you will, and it's gotten a little bit more personal. So what we've kind of been looking at is the overview. The Bible showed us the big picture. It's, man, you can see them out there by the thousands working with rigor and hard labor, and then you can see the scene kind of change to that's not working, so now they start killing the children. So now we open up a new scene here, if you will, and it's more personal. We see this man and a woman. And the woman conceived, so we kind of open up in a household. So we're getting down more personal this time. And bare a son, verse 2. And when she saw him, that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. So, of course, that wasn't allowed. And when she could no longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes and dabbed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags by the river's brink. And his sister stood afar off to wit what would be done of him. Now, I think this morning we're just going to kind of break this down as we go. But, one thing interesting here, and it's just like a lot of times when we dramatize, and I guess I do that a lot in here, but when we dramatize in a movie, a lot of times you'll see, movies have to add things to make it exciting, because it probably wouldn't be a very exciting movie if you just put Moses in a ark basket made out of with pitch and with slime and bulrushes, and put him there, and he's just sitting there in the flags on the brink of the river. It's always exciting when they take a little joyride down the Nile. I mean, that's how you make a movie, right? But that's not the case. And a lot of times all those things are good, and they do make a better movie. But when you can't get so captivated in that things and to think your mind. I mean, when you read this, you've got to understand that obviously these flags, or we might call them cattails or whatever, they don't grow in swift moving fast water. I mean, they grow where the water's kind of stagnant and it's still. So, she didn't put Moses in and him take sail and his bon voyage, good luck and Godspeed. I mean, she put him there to where he would stay. And the sister, and of course to prove that, his sister stood afar off to wit what would be done to him. So she's standing there watching him. Again, she's not running down the river chasing him. I mean, he's just sitting there floating kind of in the stagnant still water, in a little eddy, if you will. And the daughter of Pharaoh, now this is another one of those, again, I told the kids Wednesday night, I mean, I think studying through Genesis and now into Exodus, these are really exciting stories. We say a lot of times in life, we think, boy, we like to tell stories, and a lot of guys, man, we have some good hunting stories and fishing tales that we sit around and tell. But man, these stories right here, like, you can't make this up. And I think it really shows the handiwork of God. And in this case, we really get to see that as we do sometimes in our lives, But I mean, I really want you to think about, you couldn't draw this script up if you wanted to, and that's why he's God and we're not, and we're man. So watch this. So she's kept this child that shouldn't even be alive for 3 months, and she's realized at whatever point that at 3 months she couldn't keep him a secret any longer. So she's made her an ark of bulrushes. She dabbed it with slime and put pitch on it, and she set him in the river's brink, there amongst the flags, the cattails, and the sister stood off watching what's going to happen. And you'll never guess who shows up, but Pharaoh's daughter. So verse 5 says, and the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river. You know, I do like to always bring this out here. I truly believe in my heart, and I might be wrong, so if I am, just don't tell me. But I really believe that I think if anybody else in Egypt would have found Moses that day, he would have been dead. He would have been killed, or it would have had a different outcome. I really believe that. I really do. I think if one of the other women would have found him, one of the Israelites, I mean, you know, eventually that would have been found out, been killed. If any of other women in Egypt would have found him, I don't think it would have mattered. I really believe that in my heart. If any other woman in Egypt would have found him, it would have been over. It would have been ended. It might have lasted for a little while longer. But this is the daughter of the man. This is the daughter of Pharaoh. The only one that he couldn't turn down. I mean, that's his daughter. I mean, I do a lot of things for anybody in his church. But if Piper asked me to do something, it's different because she's my daughter. And nothing can ever change that. And I think that's so important. And I think sometimes I always like to stop there and mention, I mean, you know, I think we read through these things sometimes just quickly and don't think. But I'm telling you, if any other woman in Egypt would have found baby Moses, I think we'd have had a different outcome. But the woman at the time that Pharaoh could not turn down found him. Watch this. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river. And her maidens walked along by the river's side. And when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. Now, you know, again, this is the power of God. I mean, it's one thing that, again, you know, why after 3 months that at this very day that, listen, I mean, again, I don't always like to just dramatize, but I guess, I mean, in this case, let's just be honest. I mean, we're talking about the Nile River. We're talking about a basket, an ark. I mean, you know, I think she probably took a great care with it, and I think that there's some significance and importance there with that she dabbed it with slime and with pitch and all that. But I'm telling you, I mean, the odds are probably against that child. I mean, there's, I'm sure, crocodiles and probably fish big enough to eat a baby. And, I mean, listen, it's a baby. I mean, babies cry when they get hungry. I mean, babies get to wiggling. I mean, this thing's 3 months old. I mean, it's not going to stay still. And, I mean, listen, just that shows us, though, and it don't tell us all that in the Bible, but listen, that shows God's timing. That's what we don't want to miss right here, that God's timing is right on time every time. And here, that the baby stays afloat long enough that here comes the daughter of Pharaoh. She sends her maid down to fetch it. And when she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept. So the baby started crying. You know, again, God controls everything. If you don't get anything today, get that. I mean, man, the baby cried on cue. I mean, you just tugged at the only woman in the whole country of Egypt that could save this child. And he just tugged on her heartstrings. And she had compassion on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." So, you know, if that verse stopped there with anybody else, Moses is dead. I mean, she's already put 2 and 2 together. Man, this thing is, I mean, it's over. But this is Pharaoh's daughter. He's pulled on her heartstrings. So the very next verse now we have a story because of who found him. Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call to thee a nurse of the Hebrew women that she may nurse the child for thee. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Go. And the maid went and called the child's mother. Now, I tell you, if you didn't think the first part of the story was good, it's getting a lot better now. I mean, only God could put this thing together. So here's this baby that has now been found by Pharaoh's daughter, and guess who gets to nurse it and take care of it but its own mother? I mean, only God can put that together. And Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, Take this child away and nurse it for me, and I will give thee thy wages. And the woman took the child and nursed it. And the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son, and she called his name Moses. And she said, Because I drew him out of the water. You know, this is one of those stories, and I don't know where it may fall in your life, and I don't know where it may fall into mine. But this is one of those cases to where here's where you can't outgive God. You can't bless yourself or make decisions better than God. Here's a story just in the first 10 verses here of chapter 2 that shows us how this woman decided, Moses' mother decided that, you know, this is a special child. I'm going to obey God, and I'm not going to obey the Egyptians. I'm not going to go down here and kill my baby, or I'm not going to have him taken, but I'm going to save him alive, and I'm going to hide him. And, you know, it's a good story of faith. And like I said, I don't know how it fits in your life. I don't really know how it fits in mine, but what it does fit is it shows us that here she gave God, said, well, I don't know, I just know that he's special. I know that I've kept him alive for a reason, God. I'm just going to put it in your hands. This is one of them, I'm just going to put it in your hands, Lord. I mean, she literally did that. You know, we say that sometimes and we don't let go, but she literally let go. She put him there, and she said, well, just keep watching. Let's see what happens of it. Well, you know, it might be like a sickness, you know. I think there's a good lesson here. I mean, we can use it to anything, but to a sickness. Well, letting God have an illness don't mean, well, bless God, I'm not going to the doctor. It's in the Lord's hands. I'm just going, whatever he wants done. Well, I think that's where our mind reasons. Well, she let God have Moses, but she's told his sister, said, stay there and keep a watch on him. Well, you might let God have an illness, but you do your part by going to the doctor each time you're supposed to have a visit, doing what the doctors suggest. That's not that you're trying to hold it back. That's really what it means to give something to God. It's not that, well, I'm just going to give it to God and see what happens. Well, here's you a good lesson. Well, what happened in her case was now you can't outgive God, so now God gave the kid back to her, gave the child back to her, to nurse and to take care of. And basically, probably when the child is of age to be weaned, which I think most of the time in these cases around 2 years old, guess what? She didn't just keep it. She said, well, she returned it to Pharaoh's daughter just like she said she would. But God had given her, instead of just 3 months, he had gave her another 1 year and 9 months with the child. So again, he blessed her beyond it, but what? She gave it back to Pharaoh. She said, Pharaoh's daughter. And he became her son. So again, just a wonderful story. Don't miss that this morning, that this child, she brought him back to Pharaoh's daughter and said, here you go. That was our deal. And Pharaoh's daughter named him Moses. Now, again, the curtains kind of close, if you will, and they reopen, and we're fast forwarding again. Now we see Moses as a little baby. We see this story down at the river brink. We get the gist of what's happened. Now he's been turned back over to Pharaoh's daughter. So again, you have to kind of put two and two together here. He grew up in Pharaoh's house. He dresses like an Egyptian. He was trained as an Egyptian. He was taught as an Egyptian, and the child's growing. So verse 11, and it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown. So we fast forward. So he's learned how to be an Egyptian, and he's lived there with Pharaoh's daughter in Pharaoh's house. And that he went out into his brethren and looked on their burdens, and he spied an Egyptian smiting a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So again, it shows us again how this wasn't just hard labor and rigor, but man, like I said, if they needed to stop or slow down, they would hit them, maybe whip them, whatever it was. Verse 12, and he looked this way and that way, and when he saw that there was no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. And when he went out the second day, behold, 2 men of the Hebrews strove together, and he said to him that did the wrong, wherefore smitest thou thy fellow? And he said, who made thee a prince and a judge over us? Innest thou to kill me, as thou killedst the Egyptian? And Moses feared and said, surely this thing is known. Now when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses, but Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. So again, these stories we've really fast forward. So we went through the child of Moses, he's raised up in Pharaoh's house, and now it's not really told us what day, but there was a day that something resonated in Moses' mind, and he saw this Egyptian smiting this Hebrew, and he rose up against him and he slew him. And then he it told you, the Bible says, he looked one way, looked the other, see if anybody was looking around. So then the next day he meets these couple of men, and now they're kind of saying, well, who are you? Are you over us? We saw are you going to kill us like you did the Egyptians? So now he's scared. Everybody knows, and he's running for his life. Now Pharaoh heard about this, and he sought to slay Moses. And I think that tells you again, if you know something different, just don't tell me, because I like it. But I think it tells you again, Pharaoh didn't like Moses. Listen, this is a man of power. He gave an order, and he expects people to follow it. But the only person that could have found Moses and changed his mind was Pharaoh's daughter. And I think this verse right here even proves that much the more, that the very minute he has any dirt on Moses, man, I'm going to kill him. I'm going to eliminate this problem. I ain't liked him from the day she brought him up here, because that wasn't what my order was. My order was to kill him. And I think that proves it again, that shows that the very person, the only person in Egypt that could have found that baby, God sent by the river that day. And she was the first one to find him. And the very chance that Pharaoh has to have some dirt on Moses, man, he's going to kill him. So Moses flees. And he flees all the way out. He dwells in the land of Midian, and he sits down by a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water. So we close the scene. We don't close the chapter, but we just kind of, our scene ends here at this well. And Moses is sitting there by a well, and as we know, wells were very prominent in that day. I mean, a lot of things happened at a well. You can get married at a well. You can find a wife at a well. You can get water at a well. A lot of things happen at a well. So here Moses found him a well, and he's sitting here. And now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. And they came and drew water and filled troughs to water their father's flock. And the shepherds came and drove them away. So that's kind of, it's interesting to me that I guess, so apparently they had predominance at the well, but the shepherds came and they drove these ladies away for whatever reason. But Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. And they came to Reuel, their father. He said, how is it that ye are come so soon today? And they said, an Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, and also drew water enough for us and watered the flock. So again, it's kind of like this is a common theme, that he sends his daughters out to the well, the shepherds come, they run them away. I mean, why Daddy didn't go out there and take care of the shepherds. But apparently this was a common theme today. They come back a little early. He's like, why are you back early? He's like, hey, we found somebody that took care of the problem, this Egyptian. He run them shepherds off. And he helped us water the flock. Verse 20, and he said unto his daughters, and where is he? Why is it that ye have left the man? Call him, and he may eat bread. So again, maybe, I don't know. I like stuff like this. I mean, apparently this was a problem. I mean, I don't know why he didn't go out there and just take care. I mean, can you imagine every day? I mean, I don't get it. If every day my daughter come home and said, hey, there's kids picking on me and bullying me at school, I mean, I'm not going to take but a couple of days of that, and I'm going to go do something about it. I mean, listen, that's even an Andy Griffith show. I mean, remember, listen, I mean, that boy kept taking Opie's nickel every day for his milk money, and finally, remember, Andy catches on, he takes him out fishing and tells him a story, and he says, man, he says, that boy come down here and tried to steal his fishing hole, and he said, I lit in him like a windmill. And he said, well, what happened? He said, well, we're still fishing here, ain't we? Well, guess what? Old Opie come in with his toes all torn, and he said, I lit in him like a windmill, and he give all his nickels back to Barney and Andy. And listen, I mean, man, so apparently this has happened for a while. And nothing's been done about it, but here, so again, God is setting the stage behind the scenes that, well, I mean, I really believe this, because there's probably not a common theme that you just invite an Egyptian into your house that's stranger met at a well, but it's like, listen, this man helped us. He stopped something that you ain't ever been able to stop, Dad. And, man, we're home early. And he said, well, surely you didn't leave him behind. Invite him in to have bread with us. And Moses was content to dwell with the man. And he gave Moses Zipporah, his daughter. So again, you find a wife at a well. Look there. And she bare him a son, and he called his name Gershom, for he said, I have been a stranger in a strange land. And it came to pass in the process of time that the king of Egypt died, and the children of Israel sighed by reason of the bondage. And they cried, and their cry came up upon God by reason of the bondage. So again, just to stop here for just a second. So again, we kind of close the scene there in verse 20, and again, we kind of open it back up and we fast forward a little bit, and it tells us some things about Moses. It says Moses was content to dwell there. Matter of fact, Raul must have liked him pretty good, because he gave him Moses Zipporah to be gave him Zipporah his daughter, and she bare him a son, and he called his name Gershom. So again, it's telling you Moses is starting a family here. So then it takes us, the scene closes, and it opens back up in Egypt. So while Moses, and this is where, I mean, I guess this is why it does make a good movie, right? Because, so while Moses is out doing this and starting a family, and we've got the story where he left Egypt and he was on the run, but now it's kind of showing us back in Egypt something's happening too. That the king of Egypt, Pharaoh, died. So this one that didn't know Joseph, this one that made them taskmasters and slaves, he's died. And the children of Israel sighed by reason of the bondage. So, boy, they were happy about it. And they cried, and their cry came up unto God by reason of their bondage. So it's like, now's our opportunity. Can God get us out of this bondage? And God heard their groanings, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God had respect unto them. I think, and I probably don't explain this as good as some people do, but God has a plan. God created everything. God holds it all in the palm of his hand, and I think it's hard for us to even get our finite minds wrapped around that. I mean, it really is. It's hard. But God made us. God controls everything. And God is in complete control. Everything is in his time. It's his time. That's one of the miraculous things about Jesus, if you really, because Jesus was without sin. So when Jesus was here on this earth, that every step that he took, he was 100% in God's will. If you can get your mind around that, then maybe you can get your mind around that God's in control of everything, because it's just hard for our mind to comprehend that, because we're not that way. We're made up of flesh. And I say all that to say that it's not like God just forgets. But what it's telling us is that God, when it says God remembered something, God remembered Noah. Oh yeah, I forgot Noah was out there floating around for days and weeks with his family. Oh man, no, it's not. That's not what it says. What it's telling us here is, listen, God's in control of all this. And there was a day, verse 24, and God heard their groanings, and God remembered his covenant. So what that tells us is not that, oh, did God forget about them? No, it tells us that that's the faithfulness, sovereignty of God, that whatever he says, if he makes a promise, he sees it through. And I think that's really what that word's trying to tell us here. It's not that, oh, I forgot. I remembered Noah. I remembered my Egyptians down here, or the Israelites in bondage. No, it's he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, with Jacob, this promise that he had made. And he cannot lie. He cannot not fulfill a promise. He is faithful. And so now that just gives us a glimpse into that. God remembered his covenant. And now God looked upon the children of Israel, and God had respect unto them. So again, I think it just shows us the importance of God, his sovereignty, and that he cannot lie. He can't change the course because he can't lie. It's his course to do. But again, a fascinating story. There's a lot of open and closed scenes here. Next week we're going to look at chapter number 3 when Moses is on the backside of the desert here and the burning bush. But we'll pick up our reading next week, and we'll turn it over to prayer time. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this day, your many blessings. Thank you for our Sunday school class, Lord, their faithfulness to it. I pray, Lord, as we go into Exodus, that you'll bless us as the same as we travel through Genesis, that we'll learn things that we may apply them to our hearts and lives. We thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen.